So as we look at what's coming in terms of thinking about budget and process, I think we're looking at a number of challenges, and I know we've talked a lot about FY21 and what we're going to confront with the kind of changing revenue shortfall that the state has talked about. What I'm more concerned about is looking at FY22, FY23 and beyond, and really kind of thinking about the ed funding structure that we have, the reactive nature of that, in that we have a few months to put together a budget, doesn't necessarily give us enough time to, I think, make some of the structural changes we may need to make, given what we're hearing about what FY22 and beyond is going to look like, given the economic challenges that we're facing in the pandemic. I'm a bit, as I think about the information that we need to make some of those changes, I'm concerned that we may be getting that information in the spring, as those numbers, the spring of 21, after we've gone through the budget process. I think the state as a whole realizes that, and legislators are getting together soon, I believe in August, to start working through that. But I think for us as a district, it's both an opportunity and a challenge, in that I think as we're in this objectivity of the COVID-19 pandemic, where we've been thrust out of our normal reality and can really start to see kind of what was working, what was not working, we have an opportunity to design forward, but I think we have to be really thoughtful about it.
Yeah, and I think, one of the challenges that a condensed timeline places is that it's hard to have people and the community have access to enough time and understanding and opportunity to engage, so that they can come along in that process, as opposed to it being imposed upon them. And we have to be incredibly thoughtful and purposeful in putting the systems in place, so that folks feel that there's an appropriate level of transparency, because it is, number one, an incredibly confusing financial model. Number two, there's a ton of things going on in everybody's everyday lives, and so to get the amount of attention and time dedicated to understanding and being a part of this is really hard for folks. And so it just, you have a lot of you're creating a lot of tension in an environment that is already rich in tension.
Yeah, and I think that the pandemic has really sort of brought things to a head, or heightened some challenges that many districts around the state were already facing. Many districts around the state, and ours included, knew that there were some financial challenges coming right around the corner, even in the absence of the pandemic. And so I think that this has really accelerated things and really brought things into a new light, which, things that we may not have had to deal with for another several years are suddenly right at the forefront. And that is a challenge.
Yeah, and I think historically, we're used to kind of waiting. We wait for our equalized pupil on December 15th, and we see, okay, how much money do we have? And then we have about a month to make changes and shift things to be prepared for the next fiscal year. And I think the kinds of changes that we're looking at in the coming years are going to require way more time than a month to be changing. And they're probably multi-year. It's a multi-year vision, as opposed to a year by year, how much money do I have? How much can I spend? How much will the public support? I think when I think about the challenges that the state is going to confront in the years ahead, it's going to be that even if local communities want to spend the state revenue, because we are state funded ultimately, the state revenue is not going to be there to support it. So as I think about, for us, Brittany, you referenced this, that, you know, we're right up against the excess spending threshold. How the state will work to convey to local districts the fact that we don't have the revenue to support what you want to do, if the modeling that people are talking about is true in terms of the revenue shortfalls in FY22 and beyond. That's a big unknown. So I think it really falls to us right now, today, and Mary, I think you talked about this really well, that it's a really hard time to engage the public on yet another thing that can bring stress and anxiety. But at the same time, if we're going to do this as a community and do it together, we have to start engaging everybody in what we're seeing and thinking about what we do structurally, as opposed to, you know, we have to reduce 1% here or 1% there. From what I'm hearing nationally, and if Vermont reflects some of the national trends, people are talking about much higher percentages than anything we've confronted in recent memory.
Yeah, I think this is
a change of construct for folks too. Like, it's, in so many instances, people, I think, define what a great educational experience is by some common factors: class size, transport, how long my child has to be on the bus, how many resources do I have at the school. And it's going to take us as a community to understand that you can still have an incredibly high quality education with some of those data points changing a little bit, and getting people comfortable with what that movement is going to have to be in order to address the financial environment that we're in. And those two things do not have to be mutually exclusive. We can address the financial environment that we're in, and we can still have an amazing educational experience for our kids. It's just going to have to look a little bit different.
Yeah, that's really in line with what I was going to say. I think this is a challenge, but also an opportunity to recalibrate. And the benchmarks that we have historically used will no longer suffice. And so this is the time to really re-examine the whole system, the whole structure, look at every dollar that we have and determine if it's being put to its highest and best use. And maybe the highest and best use has changed. So that, the status quo, the things that the benchmarks, all the things that we have used to sort of assess ourselves and assess our system will need to change. And again, coming back to the compressed timeline, that's the challenge, is we can't start to do this in November and expect to be done in January. And we also need to look beyond just the next year. I think having a really strategic 5-year vision or 5-year plan for where the structure is now and how it's going to change over the course of the next several years is going to be critical.
Yeah,
there's this great quote from Undaunted Courage. It says, "Experience has forced on men's minds whatever has been must always be." And it's like, we all have been to school. We all know what our experience has been. We all know what we like. We all know what it was for the past 10 years. And we get so blinded by, well, that's what it has to be moving forward. And so how we can help people see that it can look different and still feel great is going to be really important for us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that's hard for people to wrap their heads around is we're used to, and we've normalized responding to a number. So, we're told this is how many equalized pupils you have, and this is how these are the parameters within which you can build the budget. We actually have to be moving towards an unknown right now, that we may not even know in this coming fiscal year. It's probably going to play out over a number of years. And so I think, as both of you shared, it's an opportunity to think about, the vision for our district, to think about equity, to galvanize people around what we believe through this process, as opposed to just talking about dollars and cents and, you know, this is how much we have, this is how much we can spend. That fails to grasp the opportunity of reimagining and re-envisioning, which educators are talking about all the time. We're always talking about a restart, a reimagining, a deconstruction of the current model to build something new. We now have that opportunity. And, you know, we didn't ask for this opportunity. It has descended upon us. But I do think if we sit back and just wait to be told, we're missing a huge opportunity.
I have some questions that I think would probably inform the board for sure, but it also would inform the community. One of which is, given the bleak financial picture, what strategies or what are we working for towards some of the struggles we're going to face?
So I think that, you know, I think that the different strategies in different years, Polly, if we're thinking about this year, our budget was developed last year and approved in January pre-COVID. So I think our strategies this year are a little different. We have kind of a fixed budget amount set, and we're having to figure out how to meet these unanticipated additional expenditures this year, and how can we be flexible in some of the things we had planned to do while we were going through the budget process. So I think that, Morgan, I know you have been really good about thinking about contracts, anticipating that at some point this year we might spend some time in a fully remote way. So last year we were in a position where we were having to pay out all of those contracts or based on what the contract was, not based on what the services that were provided. So I think that, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, Morgan, in the COVID language.
Yeah, I think this year is not so much about budgeting as sort of reacting to the challenges and staying within this budget, because, as you mentioned, we didn't have any idea what was coming down the road when we approved these budgets in early January. I think contracts is an important area where we're trying to build in language where we are not on the hook if we do end up switching back to fully remote learning after Thanksgiving, and we are operating in that world for a long time. Certainly as we're hiring new staff, filling positions, trying to be aware in a way that we hadn't been in previous years, that it may not be an issue where we're looking at changing staffing at the end of the year, but rather changing it mid-year. I think that we will have some savings in the budget. We're not anticipating field trips happening. No one will be surprised if the sports schedule is a lot different than what it looked like 2 years ago. And so there may be some flexibility there. But I think it is certainly going to be different than going into FY22, when we actually will have some experience with switching back and forth between remote learning and in-person learning, and we can start budgeting more proactively for that.
I think another factor in thinking about this year is us really getting a handle on the number of students who will be returning, depending on the model that we end up deciding upon. We all know around the state that we're going to have a certain proportion of our population whose families will choose for them not to return to in-person instruction. So I think us getting a handle on that and getting a handle on, what will we be able to offer for those children in terms of remote learning. So there'll be some staffing considerations we'll have to make there. And in terms of filling support staff contracts at this point, we've asked principals to hold off on that until we know what our needs are, because one, we don't 100% know what the model is for returning, and two, we don't know kind of the number of students and what that need is going to be. So those are some of the considerations we've put in at this point, thinking about.
Yeah, because that was going to be my next question about if, last year we had to kind of adjust really quickly around staffing and what that looked like remote versus in class. And so my question was going to be, given this, these options that we have, how do you adjust staffing in order to handle those? So yeah, you spoke to that a little bit.
Well, I think the other piece is that, we might have different needs in the classroom, as an example, because we might have fewer students in those classrooms if we return in some sort of a hybrid model, but we would have increased needs for staffing in other areas. So to meet the health and safety guidelines, having to have people ride the bus and do those health screenings. And if you factor in all of that and some of the other things that we'll have to do just in terms of health and safety, I think that, what we lose in one area might be made up in another unanticipated area.
Right. That's one. So you also spoke earlier about how we know we're working in a budget that we have, and we are trying to foresee issues for 21. Can we think further down the road and say, like, what's going to happen for 22?
Yeah, I think that's obviously for you guys on the board, that's going to be the big challenge coming up in a couple of months. We should, by November and December, have a better idea of what we need to be budgeting for in FY22. So what, how quickly are we going to be replacing Chromebooks? What are some of the sort of the traditional activities or traditional costs that we just can't really do right now? As we navigate the challenges around transportation and protecting the envelope of the building, what facilities changes do we need to put into place so we can get kids more quickly and more efficiently and more safely into the buildings for the time that we have them in the buildings. The other piece of that budget challenge for FY22 is what we're hearing on a statewide level in terms of the education fund. And I think you guys are going to have some political challenges in December when the tax commissioner sets a yield rate and we start looking at the budget we've built and what that's going to mean to tax rates. I think before this session, Mark, Perot and Jen and Ansel and some others have kind of been painting that picture, and certainly those of us who've been hopping on their meetings have have had a long runway of seeing what that could look like. For FY22, as we've discussed, a lot of districts, and we're hoping that both of ours are going to be in that boat, will be carrying forward some healthy fund balances, which they can use to buy down the FY22 tax rate. That's going to be great for that year, but when we look ahead to FY23, those fund balances are going to be coming from the year that we just started this month, and I don't think anybody's anticipating that we're going to have a lot of money left over because we haven't budgeted for those Chromebook replacements. We're not sure what kind of technology infrastructure we're going to need to invest in if we do spend more time in remote than in the building. And you can see here among three school district employees, 2 of them have to log into the Zoom from their car because of Wi-Fi issues. And so you think about our communities and what that's going to look like when you have families with 2 or 3 or 4 kids trying to get on to Zoom meetings if we're in remote learning.
I think I'm going to just add on a little bit in terms of why I don't think we're going to end up with any sort of, I think by the end of this year, we have so many unanticipated expenses this year. Like we have so many things in terms of the health and safety guidelines that we have to take care of and anticipate in terms of the cleaning and disinfecting, in terms of the additional costs associated with buying things like thermometers and the health supplies for masks and gloves and all of those things. I think that in addition to all of the expenses that we know, all the money we know we have to put into the technology, not just the technology, but like Morgan said, the infrastructure as well. I think that we're pretty worried that that's going to leave us either short at the end of the year or a little too close to zero, which makes 23 much harder. I think the other thing that I would just add to what you said, Morgan, around FY22 planning, what decisions we make now about what we'll be able to offer for those families who are choosing not to return their children to public school in person, it really matters. Because if we offer something for 100% remote that is less favorable to parents, and they choose to pull their children out of the public school system and enroll them in an approved homeschool program, that's going to have a huge impact in terms of our equalized pupils moving forward, which full well. If we start losing equalized pupils as a result of this, we have a bigger problem ahead of us.
Absolutely. So I think I have just like two more questions. One of which is, we had done some significant work around Portrait of a Graduate and kind of visioning of what we wanted our system to look like. And then COVID happened, and we kind of lost some of attention. How do we foresee continuing that work?
Continuing it, or impact associated with COVID, like if there are?
Oh, either. I was just thinking about, we had made such great gains in kind of figuring out what that picture looked like. I didn't know if this is going to maybe impact that picture, or how are we going to continue to get it to the end?
I think we're on a good track to continue out the work of Portrait of a Grad. I think this gives us a new perspective to think about that we maybe didn't have pre-COVID. And it's interesting because, high schools have really been for several years thinking about flexible pathways for students and how can they engage in their learning differently. And elementary schools, have done some of that, but not at the level that we're being forced to do now. So I think that they're, as much of a struggle as COVID is right now for us, and a lot of the negative that comes with having to be reactive and having to change things, that whole analogy of building the plane while you're flying it, it feels really hard. But at the same time, I think there's going to be some good that comes out of this, because I think there are going to be some things that we're able to do and offer for kids in terms of the type of intervention and support and the type of option they might have for engaging in their learning that maybe can remain after COVID. So when I think about that Portrait of a Grad, we want kids to be able to demonstrate proficiency in those high priority areas. And I think that we could have some greater flexibility in how we design programs that would allow kids to be able to do that at all levels, not just the high school level. So I think there might be ultimately some good things that come out of that could be a really strong tie to the work we're doing with Portrait of a Grad.
Yeah, I like that. So the other question I had was around, we as a board and a community have kind of worried about our kids during this really stressful time, and what kinds of supports or costs associated with social emotional learning, supporting kids when they come back into this kind of environment?
Yeah, I think that throughout the state, we're pretty worried about the social emotional needs that kids are going to return to school with. They will have been 6 months outside of the school building when they return in September. So I think that, there's some big worries there for us. As you know, we have filled a school psychologist position in a different way. So we now have a social emotional learning coordinator, and there's really great work that's happening behind the scenes that's really focused on building our MTSS system for kids on that side. I'm anticipating that we will have increased needs. What's going to be different for us is we're going to have more of a universal approach for all students. And some of the things that our team is recommending in terms of social emotional learning, I think that there will definitely be some cost associated with that. And I think there'll also be some cost associated for students that have more intensive needs that, might require some additional staffing potentially. It'll be about assessing those needs in the fall before we're really able to get an accurate picture of what those needs are.
Right.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be a huge issue, and just thinking about where unemployment has been going and how that's going to be impacting our kids and their families. Certainly the mental health industry has not been immune to the challenges that we've all been facing. And so they've got, I think in a lot of areas, less capacity to deal with higher caseloads and more need. And eventually those problems do end up at the school door.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So I think that, I mean, like I said, I want to kind of have the board informed about financial implications, programming implications, staffing implications. So I think we covered that. So thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
Yeah. When we're talking about, the CARES funds and the ESSER funds and all these funds, and there's this reaction that we all have to sort of be out for our own district and do what's best for our own district. And I think that, like Peter said, it's important to get the message out that collectively we need to move in a direction because we're a state-funded system. So, the more that we can move in the same direction with similar visioning and planning, FY22 and beyond is going to be better for all of us because of that.